I'm Nima Rajan. Central Canada hosted the three main federal party leaders today on day 18 of the federal election campaign. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau unveiled the Liberal Party platform, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole introduced his infrastructure plan, and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said his party would use federal lands to ease the housing crisis. Meanwhile, the Liberal Party released its election platform today. The 82-page platform includes $78 billion in new spending. That amount is more than 3 times the direct new revenues promised over the next 5 years. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau says top of mind in the plan is keeping Canadians healthy and safe. The platform also includes all of the announcements Mr. Trudeau has made to date on $10 a day childcare, climate change, and housing. The NDP and Conservative parties released their election platforms earlier in the campaign. Affordability was a key election talking point on the campaign trail alongside the economy on Tuesday. Statistics Canada reported the economy contracted at an annualized rate of 1.1% between April and June, and it estimated another drop in real gross domestic product in July. The National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations says she would remain nonpartisan both during and after the federal election campaign. In a virtual news conference yesterday, Rajan said she won't be endorsing any party in the federal election. National Chief Archibald's pledge came as the AFN announced its priorities for the federal parties. These include climate, economic prosperity, and the establishment of a healing foundation for residential school survivors and their descendants. Canada's immigration minister faced a heavy barrage of questions on Tuesday related to Afghans facing changing document requirements while trying to flee their country. Marco Mendicino says the main issue with what documents are necessary stems from the Taliban changing the goalposts on what they require for certain checkpoints. Meanwhile, Ottawa is hoping the Taliban will reopen the Kabul airport soon. Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau says around 1,250 Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and family members are believed to have been left behind. That's in addition to hundreds of former interpreters and staff who previously supported Canada's efforts in the country. Canadian veterans, refugee advocates, and others are scrambling to find alternative ways to protect those former interpreters and local staff, as well as their families. Even though nearly 75% of Canadians aged 12 and up are fully vaccinated against COVID-19, the U.S. is urging Americans to reconsider travel to Canada. Officials with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control clarified yesterday that the new recommendation is being made for the benefit of those not yet vaccinated against the virus. Dr. Rochelle Walensky says people who are fully vaccinated and willing to wear face masks are okay to travel, provided they are aware of the potential risks to the host country. A national survey suggests the majority of Canadians plan to get vaccinated against COVID-19 when the country's rollout began. 9% of respondents overall said they did not intend to get vaccinated, with hesitancy highest in Alberta at 16%. Manitoba and Saskatchewan were both at 14%. 15% of respondents who identified as Indigenous and 12% of those identifying as racialized said they did not intend to get vaccinated. The survey, led by researchers at Toronto's St. Michael's Hospital, was published online Tuesday in the Landsat Regional Health Americas. Canadians can expect grocery prices to climb even more due to severe drought in the western provinces. Dalhousie University expert Sylvain Charbois says an average family could spend close to $700 more on food this year than they did last year. Ranchers who can't afford to feed their cattle are reducing the size of their herds, which is helping to drive up retail beef prices. Growing global demand for food, as well as the return of restaurant dining, are also contributing to surging prices. A survey finds Canadian businesses are having difficulty finding workers with digital skills. A survey by KPMG found a digital skills shortage is considered to be the #1 threat to the growth prospects of businesses across the country. The poll found nearly 80% of businesses say the pandemic changed the way they work, and they now need more workers with IT skills. KPMG says while nearly 90% of businesses are investing in upgrading the skills of workers, more than half say they'll consider recruiting outside of Canada. Shiny gold medals were won last night in Calgary by Canada's national women's hockey team. The women won their first World Hockey Championship in almost a decade with a 3-2 overtime victory over the 5-time defending champion, the United States. Canada went unbeaten through the championship in Calgary. Finland beat Switzerland 3-1 for the bronze medal. All right, up next, we take a look at how the supply chain issues are affecting the availability of some products. We speak with Brendan Caldwell of Caldwell Securities up next. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this break. One of the biggest sale weekends of the year is fast approaching. Labor Day weekend is traditionally filled with retail discounts ahead of the federal holiday. But this year, Labor Day sales will be happening in the midst of an ongoing pandemic, inflation, and supply chain disruptions. That combination could lead to less than impressive discounts. Meanwhile, supply chain disruptions can be seen in multiple sectors. Canadian tech companies predict it will be months at least until their supply chain processes are back to normal. And they warn that it would take even longer to make up for lost profits and elevated costs from a string of recent issues. Well, joining us now to talk more on the supply chain disruptions during the pandemic is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, always great having you on Forum Daily. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. Great to be here.
So why are we having a shortage in certain products, Brendan?
Well, the supply chain, the ability for products to get delivered from where they're made to where they're needed has been really fundamentally disrupted, not just from COVID, but trade wars between the US and China. See, going back however long you want to go, products used to be made locally. I mean, most Canadian towns had a piano manufacturer. Now there are 2 piano manufacturers on the face of the earth. There were all kinds of little car companies. Now there's only a handful of car companies on the face of the earth. So things were made locally, then they were made nationally. Now they're made transnationally. And that interconnectedness, the globalization which you and I have grown up with, has been increasingly a part of how goods get from where they're made to where they're wanted. And that has been really turned upside down by not just COVID, although COVID's been a big part of it, but increased demand and the ability, the actual physical ability to get from one place to the other. That's been it's been a real challenge.
And how has the pandemic itself impacted supply chains within Canada, Brendan?
Well, it's not so much within Canada, although the barriers between provincial borders is another thing for another conversation. It's more overseas to Canada, particularly coming from Asia. COVID has disrupted China in a major way, which has a pretty much zero tolerance policy for COVID. And notwithstanding that's where the virus originally came from, one single case in a major port is enough to have it shut down for weeks. And given how much has come from China, not just computer chips, not just running shoes, but everything has got some part coming from there. That's what's really disrupted it. And what that means is a container that would have contained Chinese running shoes or computer chips or whatever is now not available in Iowa to load soybeans, so that soybean shipment doesn't make it to Indonesia, so that there isn't the animal feed available. So everything is interconnected, and when one part of the chain breaks, the whole thing is, if not falling apart, at least disrupted very badly.
All right, Brendan, just about 2 minutes left here, but what kind of products have been impacted due to supply shortages right now?
Well, the single biggest one has been computer chips, because we think of computer chips, and it's not just the really high-end chips that do brilliant graphic design. For enough money, those very few really high-end chips can always get from one place to another. But so much of our world is now computerized. A 1957 Chev didn't have any computer chips in it. Indeed, the first mission to the moon didn't have computer chips, it had transistors. So flash forward to the present, your car now has lots of computer chips to run everything, the brakes, the air conditioning, everything. So the big car companies in the US have been stockpiling their cars, which look ready, except there's no brakes because there's no chip to run them. So that would be the biggest thing. And that's been caused partly by COVID, partly by the cryptocurrency. The demand for computer chips, particularly graphics processing units, GPUs, has been tremendous. So that's going to need to get itself sorted out.
That's very interesting, Brendan. Now, is this a permanent issue, or do you see supply chains picking back up soon? I
think we need to think about it in permanent terms and think about how our world interacts. if there was a single book to read that is but is not about this subject, it's called The Long Summer by Brian Fagan. And it's about how, as societies get bigger and more complex and more interdependent, they're able to withstand bigger and bigger climactic shifts. And what we've seen, though, is that over the millennia, as bigger and bigger shocks hit those interconnected economies, they're more susceptible to falling apart. And what I think we need to have a pay attention to as a society, as a civilization, is how our interconnectedness is not just related to computer chips and running shoes, but fundamental resources like food. I think it's going to be an ongoing issue for a long time that we're going to have to, in a considerate, non-combative way, if we're going to get through this, work on it as a society together.
BC's state of emergency is being extended once again. The 2-week add-on comes in response to both current and potential wildfires. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth says that the potential for significant wildfire activity persists, even as cooler weather helps firefighting crews. The number of severe fires has dropped to 16 from over 30 earlier in August. British Columbia's chief coroner says the province needs a significant shift in how it treats people who use drugs. Lisa Lapointe's statement comes as new data shows 1,011 people died from suspected illicit overdoses from January to June. She says drug toxicity is now the leading cause of death in BC for people aged 19 to 39, and it remains the overall leading cause of unnatural death. Alberta's Canadian Energy Centre is targeting Quebec, Ontario, and politically influential U.S. states to change public perceptions about the energy industry. The province's so-called war room is asking for proposals for a new ad campaign to change public perceptions about the energy sector. One of the campaign's stated goals is, quote, building a social movement in support of Canada's oil and gas industry. Alberta Health Services is requiring its employees, including all physicians and frontline workers, to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by the end of October. AHS President Dr. Verna Yu says healthcare workers have an ethical and professional responsibility to protect others. While the policy has yet to be finalized, Dr. Yu says any employee who is unable to get immunized due to a medical exemption or another protected ground will be accommodated. Some Saskatchewan students will be seeing more COVID-19 tests at their schools when they go back to class. The Saskatchewan government announced yesterday it was launching a pilot project in 24 schools around the province to provide COVID-19 self-testing rapid antigen kits to families with students under the age of 12. Children under 12 currently aren't eligible for COVID vaccines. The government says more schools will be added to the program in the future. Manitoba's governing Progressive Conservative caucus chose Kelvin Goertzen as the party's interim leader last night. He replaces Premier Brian Pallister, who left office today. Mr. Goertzen will hold the title of Premier until the party's leadership vote on October 30th. He has been the MLA for Steinbach since 2003 and served in cabinet. Ontario will extend a temporary sick leave program for workers until the end of this year. Labour Minister Monty McNaughton says the spread of the more transmissible Delta variant prompted the move. The province introduced 3 paid days of sick leave in April to accommodate self-isolation requirements during the pandemic, reimbursing employers up to $200 per day for what they pay out. The leaders of 14 hospitals in Ontario's central region have come up with a joint COVID-19 vaccination policy. They say it will ultimately lead to unpaid leave or termination for unvaccinated staff. The CEOs and chiefs of staff have sent a letter to their employees outlining their hospital's shared policy, including mandatory vaccination for new employees. Beginning September 7th, all employees, credentialed staff, contractors, students, and volunteers will have to provide proof of full vaccination or undergo regular testing and an education session. Optometrists aren't seeing eye to eye with the Ontario government over funding and are set to withdraw services covered by provincial health insurance starting today. The Ontario Association of Optometrists has argued that its members are underfunded for services and are absorbing about 45% of eye exam costs. The provincial health plan covers annual eye exams for youth aged 19 and under, seniors aged 65 and older, and for people with specific health conditions. The province says the group has rejected further mediation. Quebec's vaccination passport system launches today across the province. Quebecers are now required to show proof of vaccination to access businesses and events that the government deems non-essential, such as restaurants, gyms, and festivals. Millions of people in the province have been issued QR codes by the health department containing their vaccination status. Health Minister Christian Dubé said the next 2 weeks will be a grace period during which thousands of dollars in fines for non-compliance won't be enforced. The government of PEI has created a new anti-racism table that's set to begin in late September. The new table will be headed by the province's anti-racism policy advisor, Dante Bazard, who will begin working with island residents facing systemic discrimination. The province says islanders interested in getting involved are encouraged to send an application to the anti-racism table through the Engage PEI process. All right, up next, we look at stories from around the world. The U.S. president is defending his administration's handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal. The U.K. is hosting a large-scale conference on the Chinese government's alleged genocide against Uyghurs, and Lebanese citizens are criticizing Hezbollah as the economy continues to collapse. We'll have these stories and more news from all around the world coming up after the break, so stay with us. We'll be right back. U.S. President Joe Biden has defended the way the U.S. ended its 20-year forever war in Afghanistan. In a speech from the White House yesterday, he called the military airlift to extract some 120,000 Afghans, Americans, and other allies an extraordinary success. More than 100 Americans and thousands of Afghans were left behind after the last American plane left the Kabul airport on Monday. Leading scholars and lawyers are joining politicians and human rights groups in Britain. This is for the first large-scale conference to discuss the Chinese government's alleged genocide against the Uyghur ethnic group in the northwest Xinjiang region. This is the first conference to gather so many experts on Xinjiang and genocide. Speakers will cover evidence of alleged atrocities targeting the Uyghurs, including forced labor, forced birth control, and religious suppression. China strongly rejects the allegations. Micronesia President David Panuelo says he will continue to walk around his island nation without fear. This despite an alleged assassination threat against him over his government's vaccine mandate. Micronesia is one of the few countries to impose a broad vaccine mandate. But Mr. Panuelo tells the Associated Press he wants to protect his people and he wants his nation to remain a place where the virus hasn't spread communally. He said people on the islands tend to live close together and any outbreak would spread like wildfire. The Italian government has vowed to crack down on demonstrators threatening to block train tracks. This comes as a rule requiring COVID-19 tests or vaccines took effect for long-distance domestic transport. As of Wednesday, passengers must show a so-called green pass to board domestic flights, trains, and buses traveling between regions. The rule also applies to some ferries, although local buses, trams, and subways are exempt. Opponents called for protests at around 50 train stations. Italy's Interior Minister warned that there would be zero tolerance for lawbreakers or violence. Shopping malls, restaurants, and parks and schools have been reopened in Thailand's capital. This comes after the government eased restrictions intended to slow the spread of the coronavirus. A surge that began in April sent new cases and deaths soaring. But a decline in new cases in recent weeks has led authorities to ease many of the restrictions. The government has come under intense criticism for its failure to secure timely and adequate supplies of vaccines. Many Lebanese are more openly criticizing the powerful Iran-backed Hezbollah group as the country sinks deeper into poverty and collapse. They blame the group for its role in the multiple crises plaguing the country. This includes a dramatic currency crash and shortages in medicine and fuel that have paralyzed the country. Discontent and misery have been rising steadily as the economic collapse that has driven almost half the population into poverty worsens. U.S. consumer confidence fell in August to the lowest level since February amid rising concerns about the rapidly spreading Delta variant of the coronavirus and worries about higher inflation. The Conference Board reports that its consumer confidence index dropped to a reading of 113.8 in August, which is down from a revised 125.1 in July. The Conference Board said concerns about the resurgence in COVID cases, as well as worries about rising gas and food prices, contributed to the drop. The Ukrainian president met with U.S. President Joe Biden today. In a meeting Wednesday with President Joe Biden, Volodymyr Zelensky is seeking increased military aid and backing for his country's bid for NATO membership. The White House says the meeting is aimed for showing support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Chinese and U.S. officials plan to talk this week about reducing pollution by the world's two largest economies. Relations between Washington and Beijing, and between Canada and Beijing, have been strained by disputes over trade, technology, and human rights. But they see the climate as an area for possible cooperation. China is the world's biggest coal user and has made advances in renewable energy. Venezuelan opposition parties say they will participate in the regional and municipal elections scheduled for November. This is a reversal from their boycotts of recent balloting. Tuesday's announcement comes days before the opposition and the government of President Nicolas Maduro are expected to meet in Mexico City. This is for talks to continue negotiations on finding a common path out of Venezuela's political standoff. The opposition boycotted previous elections, arguing that Venezuela lacks the conditions for free and just contests. 19-year-old Agnes Nyondezi in Saskatoon is en route to becoming a commercial pilot. When she was a young girl, she remembers watching planes fly overhead, sparking her interest in aviation. Moving from a Zimbabwean refugee camp to Saskatoon in 2016, she immediately enrolled in an aviation program. While she plans to get her commercial license by 2023, she hopes to become a captain and encourage young Black women to pursue aviation. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Again, I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily.